This cemetery has long been abandoned, but at one time was a very active part of our community. You'll have a chance to hear more about that when Historical Society President Judy Hughes and Historical Society Board Member Ron Schinleber speak. Back in the mid to late 1800s, about 125 burials may have occurred here. Many were likely to have been children and unmarked graves, originally marked only by flowers, bushes, or picket fences. Through the years, all the stones and markers have been removed and probably reused as foundation stones. When this entire piece of property was proposed for redevelopment, the village and the developer, as well as Chase Bank, made sure that the cemetery was preserved. And today, we're able to acknowledge those who are buried here. Previously, for at least the last 100 years, there's been no ongoing maintenance or care of this small abandoned pioneer cemetery. With this dedication, we'll make sure that that won't be the case over the next 100 years. Today, we acknowledge and recognize those early pioneers who put down roots in an area that would someday be called Northbrook, who toiled endlessly and helped forge the character of the community and the surrounding area. At this time, I'd like to call Judy Hughes up to share a couple of comments. Judy?
In search of a new home, some of the first settlers made the decision to turn east from what is now Milwaukee Road onto a narrow trail that cut through the wilderness and crossed over the river before heading toward the east. What a sight greeted them as they left the forest to the west. Ahead was virgin prairie, stretching in all directions as far as the eye could see to the north. And at the crest of the moraine, a great grove of hickories and oaks appeared, some of which are still alive today. Some families immediately stopped here to stake their claim and to put down roots at the western gateway to our village. These first settlers made official claim to the land in 1843 when they purchased it from the government for $1.25 an acre. The settlement they established at this corner became known as North Northfield, and even before the land grants were registered, a place of worship was established. By the 1850s, when the first documented burial took place on this land, the community had grown to become the largest in all of Northfield Township. As the congregation grew, so did the need for a place large enough to worship. In 1847, a church and cemetery were established on this property. By 1880, the building was torn down, replaced by a new church across the street, which was the predecessor church of the Northfield United Methodist Church of today. At one time, some of the graves were marked with tombstones, but by 1837, only 5 from the 1850s remained. By the mid-1940s, there was no indication a cemetery ever existed on this site. Hidden to the world, it became another old story, known to a select few whose ancestors rest here. I stood on this ground in May of 2009, an eyewitness to an awe-inspiring sight. That was when a large section of the cemetery was stripped of a foot or so of topsoil, exposing distinct grave outlines. Bathed in sunlight, the eternal resting places of our founders were evident in the untilled virgin black soil. Everywhere I looked were the discernible outlines of graves, clearly seen when the back-filled clay soil dug from the grave mixed with the topsoil when the coffin was covered. The burials were side by side and row by row instead of in family groups. From the size of the clay rectangles, you could see if the grave contained the remains of an infant, a child, an adolescent, or an adult. It was as if a window to the past had been raised, allowing those present the privilege of meeting our founders. While cars whizzed by on the road, I could almost hear their footfalls, the creak of their wagons, and the sound of horse hooves on the trail. Maybe if you listen carefully, you can hear them too in the stories they told of this place. Tonight, you are witnessing the power of their recorded oral history, passed from generation to generation, and the determination of a village, a historical society, The descendants of those buried here and those who recorded their tales and collected documents to prove it was more than a rumor that a cemetery existed here. You are also witness to the participation of a partnership between the developers and the village dedicated to honoring the founders. Daniel Webster said, "Those who do not look upon themselves as a link connecting the past with the future do not perform their duty to the world." Thank you, one and all. Those of you, thank you, one and all, for helping us perform our duty to the founders and for joining us tonight as we rededicate the final resting place with a marker honoring them. As you leave here, keep in mind that today's history influences tomorrow. Continue the traditions begun by the founders and together go forth and make our community a better place for future generations.
Good evening. 153 years ago this past February, a family had gathered around a small bed in a crude log cabin just a little over 2 miles from here. Lying in the bed was a man old before his time. He had struggled to bring his family here from Germany, across the cold Atlantic and nearly 1,000 miles across the vastness of what was America in the 1840s. Here he broke ground. He lost a wife and 3 infant children. But he had succeeded in becoming a free man with property that he could leave to his heirs. As his family pulled close around him, he struggled for each breath until finally his struggle ended and he breathed his last. In the brutal cold of the Illinois prairie winter, his friends gathered at the church where he had worshiped to bid him farewell. They had broken ground. They had broken the frozen ground to give him a final resting place among friends, family who had preceded him. His name was added to the growing list of pioneers that had tamed this wild land. Asher, Ott, Luther, Stanger, Trier, Shalley, Strobler, Kreinbuhl, Boxman, Goss, Geisfeld, Kenzier, Plague, Rockenbach, Franz, Kemper, Wagner, Walter, Wessling, Keast, and now George Schoenleber. Beginning in the 1830s, a small number of families seeking out a new life had found a place where we are now standing. Here they found fertile, untilled land that promised them a future that they couldn't have where they had come from. Here they came to make a new life in this new land. On a gentle rise just east of us, they had built a simple log church that became the center of those lives. A place where they could get together and share their lives with the people that held the same thoughts and dreams. Here they worshiped, laughed, cried, loved, married, celebrated their triumphs, and suffered terrible losses. Life was hard, but they held out against the land, the weather, the trials and tribulations of establishing a new life on the prairie. As the number of families grew, they grew out of their log church and built a new wooden church just a few feet from where we now stand. On this simple piece of land, next to the church that they had built and celebrated their new lives, they buried their departed loved ones. Fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and children were laid to their final rest. Their names were the names of those that had tamed this land, making it their own. The years passed, the congregation changed, and over the years, this land had fallen into misuse, disuse, vandalism, and eventually was lost to time, abandoned. Through the efforts of a dedicated few, this land has returned to a point where once again we can stand here and pay our respects to those who planted the roots of the community. Here they lay, no longer just a footnote in a ledger,
but acknowledged for the visionaries they truly were. Now we can honestly say that they are not forgotten, but that they are honored as they should be.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you, Judy, also. We have one other speaker today that will be coming along. Steve Schwartz will be speaking. Steve was involved in the whole development process. He and Dale Scheck, he'll be speaking on behalf of both of them in the Chase Bank development.
We are quite proud to be a small part of today's event recognizing the Aux Plaine Pioneer Cemetery. It is obviously important to recognize the descendants and those who forged before us and before many in the village to found this wonderful community. And as you've heard today, with many of the living descendants here today, and with the opportunity to come and spend time and revisit their roots and history. Although we didn't know before we started our due diligence on this Chase project, as Judy alluded to, with respect to the Pioneer Cemetery, along the way I met a very dedicated and caring person in the way of Judy Hughes at the Historical Society, who worked tirelessly with the village officials, David Schoen and Tom Poupard and Ron and many others, to make sure that this particular section of property was recognized in the right way. I would like to just say on behalf of our partnership, the public and private, and those who are quite proud and championed this particular dedication today, we're proud to be a small part of it and wish everyone well.
You're all out here to join me in rededicating this Pioneer Cemetery. So on behalf of the village of Northbrook, we rededicate this Pioneer Cemetery to those from before and to those now and in the future, that they may appreciate, understand, and enjoy another important piece in our history in this community. So thank you all for coming out today. I once again want to thank Chase Bank. I want to thank Stephen Schwartz and his partner Dale Scheck. And who in Northbrook can think about not thanking Judy Hughes when it comes to the history of our community and the work she does with the Northbrook Historical Society. Ron Schinleber for his comments, both from a historian sense and from a relative sense, I suppose, would be, if we look at it that way. Our Public Works Department did a fantastic job coming out here, making sure everything was in place. And we want to thank everyone for their time and their talents to install and maintain the landscaping. And even most important to me, I want to thank all of you for coming out and again showing how you feel that the history of Northbrook is important to learn, maintain, and pass on to future generations. Thank you for coming out this evening. Good night.